Ahoy hoy! Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or time-appropriate greeting, depending on when you are watching this video and where you are located, but thank you for joining me nonetheless. I am your host of this YouTube series, The Kevin Chandler, and you are watching The Stories Behind UFC Fight Night, Stevens versus Choi. Now, I recognize that's a stupid name for this thing, but it's not my decision to name them. It's somebody else's, so we just roll along with it. And before we get to our main event of the evening, we are going to start with the first fight on the main card. Now, again, before this, there's going to be like, I don't know, a dozen or seven or so fights that people like me are going to be super excited about, but people like you probably don't care about. So we're going to start with the first fight that you might actually be interested in, which is Kamaru Usman versus Emil Meek. Now, the first thing that kind of makes this fight interesting is they were supposed to fight a little while ago, but Emil Meek had some visa issues. While Emil Meek had some visa issues, Kamaru Usman kind of used that as an opportunity to try to find somebody he could fight that was a little bit higher ranked than Emil Meek, because you see he's not ranked. Emil Meek then was like, hey, dude, this guy's trying to, like, duck me. He's not trying to fight me. And Kamaru Usman was like, no, I'll totally fight you. And so now they're signed to fight, which is, it's funny because it's like they were signed to fight and then they kind of tried to weasel out of it, but you can't blame him for weaseling. He just wanted a higher ranked opponent, which Emil Meek is not. But regardless, they're going to fight this Saturday and we're going to find out what happens. And outside of the rankings interesting thing, the other interesting thing about this fight is the stylistic matchup. So Emil Meek is a very strong, powerful puncher, heavy puncher, puts a lot into his shots, subsequently has a tendency or is known to gas out in fights, or he runs out of cardio that he can no longer throw bombs or as hard, or, take shots, or, prevent people from taking him down, so on and so forth. Kamaru Usman, on the other hand, is an absolute monster and has just been taking people down and dominating them, and not just wrestling them, wearing them in the clinch, just making it a grindy, energy intensive fight that he then just walks away with and usually ends up finishing guys. So outside of the rankings, who's going to climb up in the rankings and, hey, was this dude trying to duck me? No, I totally wasn't trying to duck you. It's also going to be an interesting stylistic matchup to see whether or not Emil Meek can either A, use his power and strength to get the fight finished early, or keep it in the realm he wants, which is on the feet, bursts of energy, not a ton of active energy, or if Kamaru Usman can really turn it into his fight, which is just continue to push a pace and put a pace on Emil Meek that he just isn't able to eventually handle and just breaks and submits to it, and then Kamaru Usman likely gets the finish. So we're going to find out this Saturday. After that, we're going to find out what happens with Paige Vanzant versus Jessica Rose Clark. Now, this is actually an interesting example and a kind of rare occurrence of someone that I don't really know on the main events, or main card rather, of a fight night. So Jessica Rose Clark, I didn't know. I literally had to look up before I started recording this thing, and her last fight was apparently her first fight in the UFC, and she beat Bec Rawlings by a split decision. So I didn't watch the fight. I don't remember it being noteworthy or seeing any GIFs or people kind of talking about it. So I don't know anything about Jessica Rose Clark. On the other hand, I know a lot about Paige Vanzant because the UFC has been shoveling her down her throats for years. Pseudo unsuccessfully. I mean, she was on Dancing with the Stars, and from what I understand was super popular on that. But there's a difference in the fight game that besides being popular, it is essential that you win your fights. That's one of the things Conor McGregor was so good at. They gave him the path and they pushed him and gave him all the backing, but he won his fight, so he was able to work his way up. You have to do that. Paige Vanzant hasn't really been able to. She's got pushes and then she's done well and then she hasn't performed and then she's got stuck against competition that was maybe a little bit better than her and then just hasn't been able to continue to take advantage of the push that's kind of behind her. So I don't really know if this is what's happening with this fight, but Jessica Rose Clark looks kind of cute. It's her second fight in the UFC after winning her first one. I don't know if maybe the UFC is using this as an opportunity to be like, well, if Paige Vanzant loses, we can kind of turn some of that push to Jessica Rose Clark and be like, she's the new starlet of the UFC. Or if Paige Vanzant can subsequently beat Jessica Rose Clark and hopefully do so in impressive fashion, they can be like, yes, no, she is still 12 gauge Paige Vanzant to, watch and pay attention to. So this fight's basically going to be who's the next, or can still be, the starlet of the UFC. So we're going to find out. After that, out with the old, in with the new, or rather out with the new, in with the old. we have Uriah Hall versus old man Vitor Belfort, or rather the Phenom Vitor Belfort. I had to look up what the Phenom meant just to verify that, like, yeah, it usually is in reference to like up-and-comers or people like just starting out. The dude's 40, and the reason he earned the nickname is because he was like breaking into the UFC at like 19 and just like destroying people and veterans who were like performing really well, and so he became the Phenom. But now, after an entire storied career and unquestionable, you know, UFC Hall of Fame status, has won the title, like, the Phenom? Really? Still? All right, whatever. I'm not gonna judge, man. Well, clearly I am. But anyway, he is fighting Uriah Hall. Sorry, Adam. And Uriah Hall has shown flashes of brilliance. You know, for example, to clue in on that, sorry, Adam, it's kind of a meme with Uriah Hall because he was on the Ultimate Fighter reality show and he had this incredibly brutal spinning head kick knockout against this dude, Adam Serra, I think. Anyway, I'm sorry, Adam. And so after he knocked him out, it was on the Ultimate Fighter reality show, and he was out for a while, and they showed him out for a while, and like Uriah Hall was like looking at Adam's unconscious body and like so sincerely looked and was like, I'm sorry, Adam. And it's like he just felt so bad that he's this unconscious person on the thing, on the canvas. And so now every time Uriah Hall's name gets mentioned, sorry, Adam, has to get brought up. But this is going to be another experience and, you know, rankings fight. They're similar in rankings, but Vitor is on the way down and Uriah is on the way up. And that's kind of what we're going to see if it's still going to happen. I mean, MMA in general is not kind to its legacy holders, the people that are or were really good. Like, people rarely retire at the top of the game. They have to get beat convincingly, repeatedly, over and over to prove that they don't have anything left, to be this shell of this former glorious champion you loved that now is, you know, whatever, and then gets shuffled out of the... That's just what happens. That's how the sport works. It's just... it's human nature. So Vitor was, I mean, at the pinnacle, won the title, championship, all that kind of stuff, but hasn't, you know, he's 40 years old now, is, you know, has been hit and miss, you know, so we're going to see if he basically still has anything left to keep off the young lion that is Uriah Hall, or if Uriah Hall can show this as one of those flashes of brilliance that he is known for, to take out the old lion in Vitor Belfort and prove that he is where he deserves to be in the rankings and continue his way up. So we're going to find out. Then that brings us to the main event of the evening, which is Jeremy Stephens versus Doo Ho Choi. And even as I'm saying this, it's like sad to think that Jeremy Stephens, who has had a fantastic career, is basically probably going to be summed up in a Conor McGregor meme of, who the f is that guy? Because at a press conference, Jeremy Stephens tried to instigate some beef with Conor McGregor. He shut it down hard, and that's now how Jeremy Stephens is remembered, which sucks because Jeremy Stephens not only has had a great career, but built a great fan base by being this really exciting, really aggressive fighter that throws heavy hands, especially at the 145-pound weight class. So he actually reminds me, when he throws punches, of Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell used to talk about when he thought about throwing a punch, he'd think about a weight on the end of his fist that was like hanging off. So he'd talk about, like, instead of just trying to punch the guy as hard as you could, he'd also talk about swinging the momentum of that weight around so that you could get as heavy of an impact as you could. And that was really indicative in his style of punching. But Jeremy Stephens, I feel like, does a similar kind of thing. He throws haymakers from the floor 6 feet away, and if you don't get out of the way, you're dead. Most people get out of the way, but it's exciting to watch nonetheless. Now, Doo Ho Choi, on the other hand, is interesting because he was a really hype-trained fighter who still has a big hype train around him, but he ran into Cub Swanson last year, who put a kibosh on that hype train. Most notably, it was 25 minutes, absolute clinic of striking that Cub Swanson put on. Now, don't get me wrong, Doo Ho Choi looked good. He showed a lot of heart, and he had some things that surprised Cub Swanson, landed some really nice shots on Cub, but the fight itself wasn't even close. I mean, it was a clear whitewash for Cub Swanson, and Doo Ho Choi took a ton of heavy damage in that fight. Like, I mean, we know nowadays in 2018 now that, like, when you get hit really, really hard in the head, like, pretty much brain damage happens. Like, it's just an if A then B kind of thing. So Doo-Ho Choi took a lot of damage in that Cub Swanson fight. So we're going to see if that has any lingering effects. I mean, I know CTE stuff happens kind of later, but if it makes him more hesitant, more tentative, if he fights differently. But this is a good fight for him, and actually a good fight for both guys because of the style matchup. So Doo-Ho Choi likes to counter fight, and he likes to pick his shots and throw straight punches. Jeremy Stephens, on the other hand, likes to throw haymakers from the canvas. So if Jeremy Stephens can land those haymakers from the canvas on Doo-Ho Choi, he's probably going to sleep. But if the Korean Superboy can keep his distance, maintain his counter-striking, and land precision missiles on Jeremy Stephens' chin, then most likely Korean Superboy is going to continue that hype train that he had behind him before the Cub Swanson loss. If Jeremy Stephens, on the other hand, can take out the young rising superstar in the Korean Superboy, then maybe he can get out of that shell that is the Conor McGregor. Who is this guy, Mame? And we're going to find out on Saturday. So that's the stories behind UFC Fight Night Stephens versus Choi that will be going down this Saturday. I'm going to be watching it. Are you going to be watching it? Speaking of watching it, again, thank you for watching me right now. I really appreciate it. I can't stress that enough. I sincerely appreciate your viewership. I also sincerely hope that you have a fantastic rest of your evening. Thanks, and bye.